You're listening to Second Cut. This is the weekly podcast from thefilmmagazine.com where we talk about topics in film theory, history, and criticism through good discussion and film reviews. I'm Jacob, and I'm the one who was very close to doing the old mixed review movie intro.
Yeah, it's a hard habit to break, isn't it? I'm Sam. I'm the one who normally reads the book after watching the film.
I'm Kieran. I'm the one who still doesn't believe that Jacob's got our mics turned on yet.
They are going. I could see it. I fixed the little button. I didn't have to manually push it in the stupid Streamlabs.
Push the button.
So we are talking Unfaithful movie adaptations. One of our supporters, I think James, is the reason we're doing it.
It was James or Greg. To be honest, I couldn't remember, and James and Greg couldn't remember either. So it was one of them.
Okay,
I'll say it was both of them.
I'm going to credit James because his name sounds more literary than Greg. So, yeah, we basically we have some questions. Questions we're going to go over from mainly James and Greg. So, Sam, start us off. What does James want to know?
Well, James starts off with a good overall one: is what makes a good adaptation? So I'm presuming good, book to film adaptation. There's a lot of angles you could come at from that, really, aren't there?
I have a fast one. A good movie. So I mean,
what he said. Right, let's move on.
I'm usually just evaluating the movie. Didn't read the book, so
yeah.
And I'm one there are some things where I will not watch the movie until I've read the book.
Yeah, I mean, Hollywood, Hollywood especially, but I suppose film in general, since its existence, has used literature as like a free kind of pile of ideas, basically, hasn't it? It's like what can we turn into magic on, through moving images,
And I mean, let's not blame kind of like movies for starting this either. Poetry nicked from oral tradition, then that went into theatre, books nicked from theatre, movies nicked from occasionally you'll see something where it's like, oh, this movie's based on a song. We've had movies based on theme park rides. Let's not pretend that kind of adapting from another medium is anything to do with film. It's not.
I mean, for me, what I say, I don't think accuracy is like the be all and end all. I suppose you've got to have a reason for wanting to base your film on a particular work. So you've got to have some of it in there, core idea or the spirit of the thing. But really, it's about how you transform it. How you make it suitable for the medium you're working in. And making the most of your medium, whether it's TV, film, or theatre, as opposed to what's on the page. One thing that works on one medium doesn't work in another, so you've got to be aware of that.
Yeah,
and this is something when we get to it, I'll come back to for Annihilation, having read it last night and watched it today. I don't know if you also read the book, Sam. I know you're doing the film.
I did, yeah.
Yeah, but there's just the book conceptually, and we'll get into it, just does not work for film, so they had to do massive changes.
You literally could. You couldn't put that on screen and have it make any kind of sense.
Because it only works as a literary kind of tale. It's a literary form kind of telling, so it just wouldn't work.
Yeah, and it's like a lot of Lovecraft stuff, isn't it? It's how a lot of people have tried to adapt his stuff into films, but one of his main things is not being able to describe the horrific thing.
Until you get to Cthulhu, which is very well described in the Call of Cthulhu.
Yes, but generally speaking, his things are kind of it's too horrible to describe. It's like, well, and it's right to go, what the hell am I supposed to do with that?
Yeah, Kieran and I we glanced or read this paper called A Book History Approach to Film Adaptations in the Classroom from Jeffrey E. Jackson. I think he's at Monmouth or something it said at the end. But basically, he opens it by saying the traditional view of adaptation is like it's two different mediums. Books are sort of these originalist texts that are then changed and altered, and like Kieran, I think the sort of, well, here's a new way to kind of look at it spoke to you using Wuthering Heights which you can go listen to our episode on that movie adaptation from a long time ago. Kieran did read it.
In the article, he discusses a different version of Wuthering Heights, and I have to say that I've read the book and found it incredibly dull. I'm sorry, I know there are lots of people who are like, "Oh my god, how can you say that?" I'm just like, I was waiting for something to happen, and it felt like it would, and then nothing, and then he just hits people for another 100 pages.
It's when I can appreciate more than enjoyed. It was a bit of a slog for me, I'll admit. But
it's only 250 pages, but yeah,
I know, but it feels so much longer.
It's interesting. The one bit I got from this, and you said they were coming up with a new way of doing it. To be honest, I've only glanced over this quickly and maybe need to read again to see exactly what new thing they were coming up with in this article. But the one point I did come across is that there were, he says essentially, what was it? Let me get the exact thing. Indeed, one of my professors in graduate school maintains that the film adaptation course amounted to nothing more than repeatedly demonstrating that this apple is not like this orange, which is kind of in first year I did a module on called Rewritings Revisioning. So we did Angela Carter's The Bloody Chamber series of short stories and The Company of Wolves, which is the adaptation. We did Shakespeare's Titus Andronicus and Judy Taymor's 1999 version. And then we did Jane Eyre and White Sargasso Sea, which was a prequel novel written about 100 years later. And yeah, pretty much the entire thing is just going, well, here's what it did here. This is the different thing here. And it gets to a certain point where you're like, well, what really is the point of this? Because you're just like studying different texts at a certain point and go, oh, they're similar. It's an interesting so this is an interesting article. I think I'd have to reread it again, showing how completely unprepared I am to see exactly what this new idea is that they're going for.
Talk about the spirit sort of metaphor that comes out of Wuthering Heights. You said that you liked that.
Did I?
Oh, well, I'll do it then.
You do it.
Basically, he talks about Wuthering Heights, where like in the movie we watched, there was not the narrator, there was not these ghosts of people coming back like there is in the book.
It was a very down and dirty kind of gritty version of it, really, wasn't it? There wasn't really anything magical realist or gothic about it.
Yeah, the quote that Jacob you're picking up on is one that I picked up on that he applies to Wuthering Heights, and the question was, to what should we be faithful, the letter or the spirit? And I just took that to be adaptations in general. Should we be trying to get it as exactly what it writes on the page, or should we just get the feel and the concept and idea translated to the page, rather than taking it specifically to Wuthering Heights? Because in the nicest way, the more I can forget about Wuthering Heights, the better for me. I'm so sorry.
Which for this professor, basically, he says that Wuthering Heights poses the question, what is text through, what is this a literal spirit, or is this just sort of a representation of the other character? What is the adaptation? Is it spirit? Is it creating a visual because that's what writing is originally. He talks about that too. Is it used to be spoken word, but then we started writing it down.
Although actually, do you know the aside from kind of pictorial and hieroglyphics and things like that, the first form of writing that we've got, any of you know what it was?
I just know Gilgamesh. If it's not. If it's prior to that,
it would have been written in this. It was cuneiform. So in Mesopotamia, which is where Babylon is from, they have these stone tablets and used a stylus and used to make this kind of lesson thing. And essentially, what it was, the first kind of writing, kind of written writing rather than pictorials like hieroglyphs and stuff like that, pretty much of receipts, a proof of transactions, like goats for wheat or something like that, and we have a receipt of this transaction. That is what original writing is. So the idea of having these kind of ethereal dreams and putting them down in the text, it's like that it kind of comes later, rather than kind of. So the first writing we have is literally just proof of receipt.
Yeah.
Finances.
I think sort of the core of this theory is that there's cultural texts. So like I think of The Little Mermaid as my ready example of this. People were so up in arms about the newest Disney live action adaptation being not exactly the same as the other one. Well, it's an adaptation. Like, it's not remaking the film, it's making a different version. And so culture texts in sort of, I guess, literary theory or textual theory. It's a general term for a work of literature that, through constant adaptations in a variety of media, has become the common property of popular culture more generally.
Yeah. And I think in kind of literary spheres and things like that, which is where I am most of the time now, things like the Odyssey and kind of these Greek myths and stuff that were put down in Homer and Hesiod and things like that are now kind of cultural, like international stuff. And just like folklore and sagas and Norse sagas, things like that, are now kind of cultural texts rather than specifically ascribed to one particular writer. I think even Shakespeare at a certain point, yes, it is obviously Shakespeare's writing, but it is now just adapted so many times and morphed through things. Like, I didn't hear anyone complaining about The Lion King that, oh my God, this doesn't start after the father's dead. How dare you do this to Hamlet? Like, and at the same time, you don't go to Hamlet and go, oh my God, how dare you put ghosts in this? Whereas the original Amleth story in the Norse sagas, which is essentially the Northman, the Robert Eggers movie. Apparently, I've yet to read it, which I probably will do, but that doesn't have any ghosts in it, whereas Hamlet obviously does. And nobody, I doubt, was up in arms in the 1600s going, how dare you put ghosts in this and not be faithful to the original Norse saga story? Like, it just doesn't happen, you know?
Yeah.
So some things are just absolutely stupid. And if it works, it works. If it doesn't, then it doesn't.
And so I think for me to summarize the last bit of, which kind of plays into the question James asks, but you could do a comparison in the sense of, is this a good adaptation of the material? But it has less to do with the originalist. Did you stick exactly to the sanctity of this, ephemeral idea of literary, whatever, perfection, or did you do a good job putting it into this other medium?
And I will come back to that one very quickly before I jump in. I will say my comments on that. I will come back to that specifically when I come to mine, which is Haunting in Venice, the Poirot film, because the first two films were very, very close to the original. The third one is completely not the other way, and there's specific reasons for that.
Yeah, I mean, going on from that, Liam asked, is being faithful to the book actually important? When it comes to making a film, and again, so we kind of covered a bit of that, but I think again, there's got to be a reason you're using that particular text, to base your work off of. But yeah, I think I often find being slavish to the text is a drawback as opposed to a bonus, really. I mean, loads I'm to kind of mention of these days, with J.K. Rowling, I think the better Harry Potter films for me were the ones that weren't slavish to a text, that kind of went a bit more off the beaten path and had the bravery, to do their own thing. Like the Prisoner of Azkaban, I think was probably the strongest of the films, and that's probably the least faithful to the book. But it just had a bit more about it. It was more interesting because of that for me.
And even to go to Jacob's neck of the woods, even something like Apocalypse Now. There we go. Which is an adaptation, but at the same time is very loose. And although apparently Coppola had it with him the entire time like a Bible, it's not like Heart of Darkness. It's untrue.
Yeah. I mean, most Philip K. Dick adaptations usually use this core idea and then kind of the core premise, and then just go off and do their own thing. Really, like Blade Runner does that, Total Recall does that, Minority Report does. It's just, and obviously the classic one is The Shining, isn't it? It's a very different take on the material to obviously Stephen King's book, but both versions work for different reasons.
I mean, Kubrick did that in general. The original book for Dr. Strangelove, is it Red Alert, I believe it's called, was not a comedy. The original book for Full Metal Jacket, Short Timers, like the story in Full Metal Jacket ends just over halfway through the book. There's a load more stuff that goes on after that. So, he was constantly taking this stuff and redoing it and changing it, having to do. And even 2001, it's technically not an adaptation of the book, an adaptation of the short story.
The book is the adaptation of the script.
Well, they kind of started off at the same time to adapt it, and they did kind of that as they went along. So it kind of started off being close, and in the end got fairly far apart, which is why there are some changes.
I think for me, I don't know what faithful means. Like obviously, like, Liam's just asking this question, but I think the implication is faithful to the plot points. And I'm not concerned with that. Like, as much as I am faithful to the ideas, the imagery.
Yeah, like super fans who get up in arms and really kind of finicky about having, oh, you didn't have this scene, you didn't have that character. They want every single thing in the book, including your film. Well, if you did that, you'd have a 15-hour film.
Yeah.
It's like, and you can't even really do that easily with TV series. I mean, Game of Thrones adaptation, they cut a load out and change a load of things. And obviously, because the series isn't finished yet, they end up going off and doing their own things towards the end. So it's just different mediums, different rules, and it just doesn't work that way. You can't.
And if you want, if you want something that's exactly the same as like the original book, for example, there's an easy way to do that, and that is read the book. Like, what more do you want? Like, the idea that you can just transfer exactly from one medium to another is ridiculously stupid. And especially with film, there are always, at the very least, going to be people involved that are wanting to get their money back. So changes are going to have to be made. My favorite one is Body Snatchers, when that was made into Invasion of the Body Snatchers. The ending's completely different. In the book, essentially, they find the plant where they're growing all the pod people, burn it down, and the aliens go, okay, it's clear we're never going to be able to take you over, and they bugger off back to the stars. All the film adaptations go for a kind of more paranoid ending, which I'm fairly sure is like, let's cash in on this and get some more money. It's a scarier ending. People will come back and say we get more money. And as far as I know, the only film to actually do that proper ending is The World's End, because that's the ending of it, where they go, we don't like being told what to do, and the aliens just go, yeah, it's pointless arguing with you, we're going to bugger off now. And everyone's like, what the hell is that ending? That's a ridiculously, stupidly abrupt ending.
Yeah.
But it's nicking it off the book which inspired the entire film, essentially. Well, so it's kind of going to plan.
Synthesis is its own skill and like kind of vital to adapting a book to screen. An example that I actually just watched yesterday, this movie called His Only Son. It's an adaptation of the story of Abraham, but like mainly the about 18 sentences where he takes Isaac up to kill him and sacrifice him to God because God told him to. And so in order to turn that into a feature-length film, they have flashbacks to things, but they'll also have random bits where they're like, oh, you remember that time you saved all the slaves with that army of shepherds? And Abraham's like, oh, yeah, I do remember that. That is me. The reason it's a bad
King vignettes, like,
well, the reason it's a bad adaptation is the only flashbacks we get are to him fighting with his wife. They don't show those exciting extra biblical action scenes that they are describing and have made up for the purpose of, like, I don't know, making this character seem more interesting than he is in the context of the film. So not being faithful and adding stuff is fine with me if it's going to make it more interesting.
That just reminds me, remember when Cinema Sins was hilarious back in the day and actually did good stuff? When he was doing the prequels, whenever like Obi-Wan and Anakin would mention, oh, that thing on this planet that doesn't, matter, and you just go, well, that sounds like a much more interesting story than the one we're watching. Why aren't we seeing? It feels like that, and there is a question of slightly differently, but things like being ripped off from other mediums, kind of in a way, bringing it in. At what point does like it become not a rip-off and now it becomes an homage? Like, what? But is it rip-off if it's done badly, an homage if it's done well? Like, where's the line? People are just so tricky about these things.
And obviously, we've already covered like satire and parody as well. All these different lines they do blur, don't they?
Hey, all stories are tropes. It's a matter of how well are you doing it and executing it. But I think that.
I remember on the rest of history, they on the podcast they decided that. After 30 years, it's history. Any more recent than that, it's politics, which is about.
I think I've touched on this a little bit, but James's question of how come The Hobbit failed to do the same as The Lord of the Rings in terms of adding and removing stuff from the appendices, like.
I can do that.
Yeah.
Because they wanted to turn The Hobbit into something it's not. It fundamentally isn't. It's like we had Lord of the Rings first. Like, okay, that made all the money, so we're not just going to do The Hobbit. We're not just going to adapt a modest little children's book. We're going to make Lord of the Rings, but earlier. We're going to do a Lord of the Rings prequel rather than The Hobbit.
Yeah, that and the fact that Peter Jackson, when he started to make it, it was going to be 2 movies, wasn't it? And then, like, halfway through filming, they decided, no, you've got to make it 3.
The studio stepped in and said, no, we want another trilogy. We want more money.
Yeah.
So we're going to take your natural kind of break point in your film and then artificially inflate it and add some other stuff to pad it out.
I was going to say, like, The Adventure to Lake Town is movie 1. Lake Town and the Dragon with a little bit of battle at the end is movie 2. That's the way it should have been, but you have to add other stuff in. That the fact that The Hobbit is like 350 pages. Lord of the Rings is like 1,500.
Yeah, the original finale of movie 1 was the barrel scene. That was their action finale, apparently. And then, so as you say, they would have just got to Lake Town. There would have been, tease a Smaug for next time, you know.
Sorry.
No,
I mean, just to make it more general and not only Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit. Like, if you're working off short form, like short story or something like that, a short film, you have to add stuff. Like, there's nothing wrong with it if it fits, if it's interesting, if it applies to like the themes and that sort of stuff, evokes something. Sure, go for it.
I'll give a prime example of. No, go ahead, Sam. I talk enough.
No, I was going to say one of my best recent examples. I really enjoyed the TV adaptation of Neil Gaiman's American Gods, mostly because they didn't quite get around to finishing the story before it was cancelled. So basically, they got about 2/3 way through the book, and then they said, "No, we're not doing any more now." But what I liked is it took some time to actually get to the key plot points. But what they did in that time was really interesting. They actually gave some of the side characters a bit of more of an inner life, more interesting things to do, and expands on them, and kind of gave them a bit more time to shine, which I think is worth doing. If you've got the luxury of like a TV series, you can do that. And often is kind of taking the characters supporting players who don't necessarily get the time they deserve, but could potentially be interesting, doing something different with them that kind of makes it worth actually adapting into a different medium for me.
And I was going to mention the really good example of this is They Live, the John Carpenter movie, which is based on a short story by Ray Nelson called 8 O'Clock in the Morning, which is like 1,500, 2,000 words long. It's nothing. And it goes along with such is woken up a hypnotist show. And one of the fascinators, as they're called, the agents in it, kind of is the hypnotist and snaps him out of the trance. But unfortunately, George Nada snaps all the way out and suddenly sees them. There's no sunglasses, there's no nothing. When you get to the film, it takes like 25-30 minutes to get the sunglasses to put them on and see all this stuff. So like all the stuff beforehand had nothing to do with the short story. And even it came out last year, I think Jacob, you saw this as well, The Boogeyman, the Stephen King short story, where they essentially Sam, you saw it. Did you see it as well, Jacob? Yeah. So it's like the original short story is just like a guy talking to a therapist about these things he's been seeing in like past events, and kids have died and stuff like that. That gets relegated to like a 5-minute scene in the film.
Yeah,
and
it's like a prologue, isn't it? And then it's just like they should do their own thing after that.
Because I think what obviously, instead of like taking that out and making that the film, which would have been the obvious way to do it, they went, no, let's just make everything else up, and it's just poor as a result. So it's a way that you handle it, and it's whether it makes it interesting. And there are just some things that will adapt and some things that won't, and there are obviously going to be different reasons for it. Maybe, and I think, to be honest, that one got adapted. When I first saw the trailers, it was like, oh, based on a story by Stephen King, and it's like I've read all of his shorts collection, so I read Boogeyman, and I just watched it like, well, what was that? I have no recollection of it at all, because it's one of the most subpar kind of bog standard early King stories ever written. And it's on the screen, it's like, this one? Really? Why? Like, of all of them, what's this one doing? And it has almost nothing to do with the story. It's pointless.
My Christian movie example, part 2, is Left Behind is essentially just adding stuff to the Bible to make it conform to, well, I mean, because first of all, the entire apocalypse narrative in the Bible is not coherent or literal, or even all in the same book. There are things taken from over here and over here, but
It's adapted from like earlier myths and legends and stuff
yeah,
like that. The Beast
people
is not actually the Beast; it's Nero.
People in the 20th century or 18th, 19th, whatever, took all of that and tried to turn it into like a cohesive idea. And then in the 21st century, or 20th, I guess, too, somebody was like, well, I'll make this into fiction books with like human drama and stuff, and then making it into a film with Nicolas Cage. I mean, there's other ones too that are more faithful, but the Nicolas Cage version is one section of the first book. And so they have to add in stuff like the little person and the Muslim that sit next to each other. That's just an entirely constructed little story made for the section of an entire series that Nicolas Cage stars in. They had to add things.
Yeah. I think one of the main things is that when it's done well is when things are added or modified to suit an adaptation. I think where it tells is when things are added or modified essentially to pad a runtime, which is normally what happens when the issues arise.
Yeah. Sometimes you have to cut, or a lot of times it's synthesize. Sometimes you don't. Last
Alia
question.
June, my favorite character from the book, is not in the movies. What the?
Who's your favorite character?
In the book, Alia. Like, I loved Alia as a character, and she gets relegated to Anya Taylor-Joy having one shot and some voiceover still in the womb. It's like, what the hell is going on? Like, so it's like when I was kind of watching it, I'm thinking about it. I'm like, I have to contain myself, because I know it's an adaptation and I know things need to change, and I have to try not to compare it to the book, which is my favorite character. And you offer glimpses, and I just want to punch Villeneuve. Like, what are you doing?
Kieran, I'm glad you mentioned Dune, because it's no longer an answer. It made it to a movie yet that you would like to see, or a bad adaptation get a second chance. And but for me, it is Belinda Blinked, the porno series from Rocky Flintstone. They were casting it as the podcast went on, but it should obviously be a film.
Okay.
Adaptation that I want to see get another go, from because I kind of read it when I was very much younger. I want to see another go at Eragon proper version this time, because it was one of those ones that I read as a kid, and I've read I think he's on a new one now, Murtaugh.
You kind of have to be a kid to enjoy it, though.
And then I saw the films, and I was like, oh, I really like this film, because I was like 8. And so at that point, you don't know about film criticism. You just watch films, you go, I like it because Dragon. And then as I've grown older, I'm like, yeah, this was not great. Really not good. So I want to see that get into the shot.
Yeah, well, I think one of some of mine and only kind of, they've had good adaptations, but then they promised sequels that never happened. So I love one of my favorite adaptations of all time is the Gary Oldman Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy, and I would have loved to have seen him do more installments of that, and kind of navigate that world a bit more, his take on the character and everything like that. But that's never going to happen now. But in terms of things that haven't happened, I'm a big fan of the Shannara books, Terry Brooks' Shannara books. So again, if you want like another big fantasy epic, to rival, Lord of the Rings or Dune or something like that, it's a bit fantasy, it's a bit sci-fi, it's really cool. And the only version of that we've had so far is a really crappy. I can't remember who made it now. It was a TV adaptation, one season. I want to say it was MTV or something, but it was basically made it like very teen. It just I think they got rid of most of the darkness and the nuance and a lot of the mythology, basically made it very generic and cheap looking. So I think get a proper budget behind that and someone who actually cares about the material, that would be a really enjoyable one.
I want to see just my things that haven't been done. As a James Herbert fan, they did an adaptation of Haunted back in the day. I think Jude Law was in it. I think I've seen about the first 10 minutes and I haven't seen the rest. Apparently wasn't very well received, and James Herbert didn't really like Hollywood adapting his stuff anyway. The Fog I don't think would work, and even though I'd love to see that, or The Rats, but I want to see a proper
How similar is it to The Mist?
It's not. Like
Speaking of The Mist, I saw that for the first time the other week, and I love that basically Darabont adapted 80, even 90% of the book, like just almost word for word, and then said, "I don't really like this ending. I'm doing my own." And King was right. Yep, you're right to do that. Your ending is a lot better.
Yeah. It fits. So like in the novella, they just kind of manage to get into a car and start driving off and escape this, and they just keep going. It's weird.
Yeah.
Essentially, you couldn't work out how to end it.
Let's not spoil the actual end of the film. It is devastating, but it's worth experiencing for yourself. I'd say.
Yeah, it reminds me of the Stephen King once got asked, "Is there a story that you've never finished?" And he came up with, apparently he had the idea of somebody going into like a bathroom at an airport and then not coming out. And then, like, the husband going, "Can you go see if my wife's still in the bathroom?" And then the person they send in doesn't come out. And then somebody else goes in. Eventually, it's like the SWAT team go in, But he was like, I can't write that because whatever ending I come up with will be awful. Like, there's no way you can end that satisfactorily. And there are some things like that you think, imagine Hollywood might get the idea, but no matter what ending you put on, they'd have to shove an ending on it. It'd be awful. Regardless of what you do, it's just like, oh, if it's open-ended, people complain. If you say it's alien, people complain. If you say it's monster, people complain. If it's the most contrived thing in the world, people will complain. There's just no way to end it correctly. And that's why you don't do it.
My bad to good.
I've just thought of another one that they haven't really. Well, they've tried, but it works. Someone someday is going to be able to get Terry Pratchett right on the screen, surely.
I thought that's what you were saying initially when you said Terry. So.
No. Yes, I've done Terry books. I like my Terrys, but no, Terry Pratchett. Yeah, they've tried on TV a couple of times. Apparently it's worked on stage. They've done some decent stage adaptations from what I've heard. And back in the day, like computer games and audio books kind of work. But someone's got to get that right. And again, it's tone. It's kind of. Again, possibly, maybe the issue is not everything in the book would work on screen, because a big thing about Terry Pratchett's writing style is his use of footnotes. It kind of adds like comical kind of additions, to what's going on. But you can't really do that on screen unless you had just someone popping up in the corner or just a bit of narration. But
we need the adaptation of the screenplay being like written from Infinite Jest. Like that the footnotes are for. And then my bad to good adaptation, I want Twilight and 50 Shades without the author's direct involvement. So just give it to filmmakers.
Isn't that the same thing?
I mean, essentially, yeah. One is a fan fiction to actual fiction adaptation. But yeah, I guess we're going to touch on a lot of these concepts and ideas in these reviews as well.
Yeah,
and
we should get on to them after my note very, very quickly. Going back to the essay very quickly because we'll forget about it. He was talking. No, if it's he or she was talking about Oliver Twist and things like that, and how Dickens was writing it essentially. A serialized, and then it became a novel, and this twigged something off because everyone complains, it's producer interference and things like that, and people just doing it for money. They don't really care about the materials, they're just doing it for money. And I remember that a lot of these pulp writers in like the 1840s and that were literally writing by the line and getting paid by the line. So there's a book I've yet to read that I want to, from like 1844 to like 7, that was serialized, called Varney the Vampire. And it is literally about a vampire, but then like after 200 pages, he definitely gets killed. But then the next chapter comes back and then definitely killed. And he was like shot, exploded, set on fire, drowned, everything. And essentially the reason he kept coming back, it's now like over 1,000 pages long. It eventually ended up being because the guy was getting paid by the line. So he just kept bringing him back, kept writing it. So let's not say this is like, literature would never do that. They did, and they do.
Oh, yeah.
Was getting paid by the chapter.
J.K. Rowling was not writing for her health. She made lots and lots of money. There's nothing wrong with wanting to make money with the thing that you made. If it's good, who cares? Like, I've never read Oliver Twist, but what he was writing about Oliver Twist, like, it makes a lot of sense. And I think what reminded you of that specifically is he talks about like Oliver is dead at the end of every chapter in the imagery and symbolism, which I don't know if that was conscious. I'd love to learn more, but maybe I'll actually read Oliver Twist eventually. I need to read Naked Lunch first because I've owned it for a while.
hang on, you've owned it for a while. You decided you were going to discuss Naked Lunch, which we'll get onto now, and you've had the book and you decided not to read it.
I mean, I've read parts of it. Here's the thing. It doesn't matter because the book, Kieran, I told you this in the chat. Naked Lunch is Finnegan's Wake, but with like semen. It is.
I haven't read Finnegan's Wake.
Now,
tell you.
Finnegan's Wake could also be Finnegan's Wake with semen, but this
it's famously incoherent and just.
I know it's Joyce.
Yeah, Naked Lunch is the same way. It's not a chronological story. It's just a series of, I mean, essentially, like Dickens, he was writing just things, and they all ended up in the same sort of book, a collection of stories or whatever that very vaguely connect, and people can like pull the story out of it, but you're not getting the story by reading it. Let's see. I'll just pull out a random sample. Apparently, the book is made to be read in whatever order you want. There are no rules. You can just start at any chapter and go.
Welcome to postmodernism.
Yes. So here we go. I think this is in the middle of a trip. Well, I'll go to a part that's definitely in the middle of a trip. So he has taken something.
Journey or drugs?
Drugs. Because William S. Burroughs, he is of the Beat generation, one of the founders, along with Kerouac and Allen Ginsberg and a couple other people. He was like the old man of the group. He was just kind of hanging around campus while they were all in school, and they talked about writing. They talked about their thoughts and theories on it, and that makes it into the movie, their sort of real life discussions and stuff. But yeah, here he is on the Yaj state, which refers to a plant from South America that William S. Burroughs went to go find, and he wrote Allen Ginsberg, letters about it. Let's see. He wrote, "Since the Indian, straitjacket for air boas, trade joke. Nothing so maddens an anthropologist as primitive man, referring to themselves contemptuously as our naked cousin, does not regard any death accidental, and they are unacquainted with their own self-destructive." The book it's not nonsense, but there are whole portions where like he's not pluralizing things that should be pluralized, and the verb tenses are weird. Yeah, Kieran, you nailed it. It is postmodernism, the book. But it sort of like how in the 80s and 90s it was hip to like have ultra violence and boobs and stuff. This is the literary version of that. They had trouble getting it published, but Olympia Press, who published Lolita, did finally publish it. And yeah, it's a weird book. It's a very weird book, and it's pretty much impossible to adapt as a straightforward adaptation. I looked into it. Apparently Finnegan's Wake was adapted. I need to watch that movie instead of reading the book. Because at least Burroughs' language, whenever you can't understand it, you can kind of parse it out. So there's the opening. He's talking in like 50s gangster talk or whatever. He'll be like, "Ever see a hot shot kid? I saw the Gimp catch one in Philly. We rigged his room with a one-way whorehouse mirror and charged a Sosky to watch it." You know, he's talking in this hip lingo.
This is when we get done for copyright, you know.
Yeah, you have to picture him like snapping along to everything he's saying, probably. And you know, to give a little background on Burroughs specifically, because I think these ideas are sort of paramount to the film. He sees writing as a sort of transformative act. So it's not, you know, just putting your thoughts down onto paper. It is supposed to be transcendent of the self, of the specifics. That is how he is putting his words down on the page. The author is a conduit of specific experiences that sort of become universal in that transcendent way. He sees all literature and writing as a vehicle for social critique, which, I mean, apparently does make it through in the book, and obviously in the movie too, because it's a bit more coherent. interconnectivity. This is like the getting into woo-woo stuff, but interconnectivity of the cosmic. And so,
apparently, Burroughs was very much into kind of magic and spiritualism. Like practicing, like scrying and things like that.
Yeah, the traditional literary mode doesn't meet what he was trying to do. One theory he employed was cutting up like newspapers, his own writing, and crafting new sentences and ideas and stories to find connective meanings between everything.
Poets now do that. It's found poetry, I think it is, where they'll take things like receipts and things like that and see what they can make out of things like that.
And one thing from Kerouac that's brought up in the film is his not automatic writing. He had another word for it, but he was like, any attempt to edit your own writing is censorship. And that's definitely not the case in Burroughs' writing. He does believe in editing and changing, just in a very weird way, as we just discussed. So that's sort of where Cronenberg is coming from. David Cronenberg, probably the best person to adapt this.
It's going to be one of the Davids. It's going to be either Cronenberg or Lynch, really, wasn't it?
Yeah, it had to be.
And to be honest, watching it could have been either.
Yeah, well, other than the body horror stuff, I don't think...
The body horror stuff is more Cronenberg, although Lynch isn't completely adverse to stuff like that.
Sure.
I think Lynch would have to have like some kind of a moment of almost jarring beauty compared to the ugliness of the rest of it. Whereas Cronenberg never wants to have beauty in his film. It's just, it's just gross out after gross out bits.
So basically what he had to do to make this a coherent story is he brought in things from other literature from Burroughs. He brought things in from Burroughs' life specifically, which are themes in his stories. The big one being William S. Burroughs is if he's famous for anything besides drugs and sort of being a proponent of like queerness, but in a very self-hating and deprecating manner, it is that he shot his wife in Mexico and killed her. So in the 1950s, he was hanging out in Mexico with all the beat buddies. They were all riding down there, and he wanted, there's several different versions of this apparently, but the one that makes it into the film is he wants to show off their famous William Tell trick, and he put something on top of her head and shot her in the face, and she died. Everybody saw it, and he ran away from Mexico and was on the run from justice and eventually returned to the United States. But that is something that happened in his life. He murdered his wife. And faced no retribution or anything for it. No consequences.
If it's an accident, is that technically manslaughter?
Who knows if it was an accident? I don't think we can say that for certain.
In the film, I think it's meant to at least look like an accident.
Yeah, well, yes, it's meant to look like an accident, but I'm sure there's something there about the latent desire to murder your wife throughout the film too, because what the sort of plot is that this is from another Burroughs book. He's an exterminator, and his name is William Lee. He's a stand-in for William Burroughs, literally the author conduit, and yeah, he's working as an exterminator. There's scenes at like the exterminator lounge that remind me of Taxi Driver, where they're all sitting around talking about exterminating. But yeah, he goes home and his wife is using his exterminating powder as a drug. And so his friends start doing it. He starts doing it. And it's just this giant spiral, essentially, that goes into being questioned by the police. And they
the nicest way, it's a very 90s American film.
It is. It's very 90s.
It feels
very conspiratorial.
Like that would go in with like Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas, a little bit like Requiem for a Dream.
Yeah,
kind of, the drug use bits. Very 90s. He
finds out that he's going to become a secret agent. He travels to Interzone, which is a stand-in for this like international like section of Tangiers in Morocco that was like a weird like international waters kind of place, I guess. I didn't do a ton of research into it, but that's sort of one of the originators of this was like the Interzone stories. and so he just kind of threw them into this collection, and they become part of the narrative. But he sort of takes refuge there on the run from murdering his wife and becoming a secret agent. And
For the cockroaches.
Yeah, for the cockroaches and the mugworm, or whatever they're called, mugworms, and the giant alien creatures. And basically he has to write reports, which, if you know about Burroughs' literary theory, is him writing. It is him writing about his experiences, things that are happening on these like living, breathing type, like weird biological, grotesque typewriters, which gradually transform over the course of the film. And I don't know what the point is, to be honest.
Yeah. I'm becoming steadily more addicted and kind of affected by this powder, this alien powder, it's like a spore type thing, isn't it? It's like, so it's not like any drug we know, but it's obviously got the same effects as the drugs we know.
Does anybody have like an ending portion of the plot summary? Because it kind of ends.
because he's an exterminator when he's in the city, isn't he? And it's like, and he's using kind of the powder that's kind of used to kill the bugs, but then there's like a connection with the aliens, and it's all very confusing.
Yeah, I mean, and then there's a lady who says she's his wife, who's the wife of somebody else, and I don't know. I don't know. That's the movie. It's just a bunch of weird stuff put together, and it's fascinating
you thought
to watch.
Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas was weird. This is another step up.
Yeah, I mean, it's weird in the sense of using like practical effects in grotesque ways, as opposed to using like camera and editing to create drug effects. And I think the powder is a stand-in for this thing called black meat from the book, which is also a hallucinogenic, but also like this. I don't know. It's weird. It's all weird.
I don't know if the cockroach typewriter thing, because I mean the back of the typewriter is all very suggestive.
Yes.
Of certain orifices. So I'm not sure. You're saying obviously Burroughs' sexuality was he was definitely queer, and you said he was.
He wrote a book called Queer, in fact.
Yeah. I don't know the precise details, so I don't want to go all in on a thing. You said he was self-deprecating of it?
Self-hating. There's some homophobia throughout his literature.
Yeah, even though he is obviously himself kind of very confused about who he is and stuff like that. So I'm wondering if maybe there's a kind of the act of typing and writing kind of puts you in touch with yourself, and therefore that is kind of a way of getting in touch with his sexuality side, and the whole cockroach thing is maybe a way of him showing the negativity side of it, and therefore it's good and bad at the same time. I don't know if that is the interpretation of it, because it's got the two sides of it.
It's an interpretation, certainly.
Yeah, well, it's the three things. It's the cockroach. Realistically, this is made of three main kind of images or sets of motifs. You've got writing, you've got the bugs, and you've got sexuality and sex, essentially.
Yeah.
And all
those
drugs. Three things are contained in the drugs. I mean, he even puts it on the lips of the typewriter early on and gets a high of it. So I'm wondering if just all that is coming together as a way of him or Cronenberg putting a visual representation on essentially Burroughs' inner storm and confusion of himself.
It is all 100% Burroughs. I guess the best way to put the literal story of this is it's the story of William S. Burroughs. And it's funny you mentioned the resemblance of the cockroach back and the human orifice. Yeah, there's a part where he has a monologue about the man who learned to speak with his anus. And the anus slowly takes over his body until it is the thing itself. The only thing it needs him for is eyes, because it can't see. Yeah. That's another like short story or something he wrote, like just a little thing that made its way in because it relates to the imagery. It relates to the queerness. Yeah. And the dark side of humanity, being expressed through him.
Yeah. And there's other points where like the writing equipment kind of seems to transform even further into other kind of sexually suggestive kind of imagery, basically.
Which is,
and
that bit is definitely all Cronenberg.
Yeah. I don't think anyone kind of marries kind of like the gross out kind of nightmarish body stuff with kind of worrying sexual kind of stuff like Cronenberg kind of does.
It is a match made in heaven, really.
There's the sex scene where like the person becomes like a scorpion alien creature, like literally the thing from Alien that like jumps onto your face. Yeah, the face hugger. It's a weird movie.
Do we think it works very quickly to finish 2.5? Do we think it works? What are our final thoughts on it? I mean, as none of us have read the book.
I personally love the movie, and I kind of I've seen it fairly recently, and after discussing Fear and Loathing a few weeks back, I've cooled to that over the years. I used to really like that, but I've come around and say, well, I still enjoy it, but it doesn't work as well as I always thought it did. Whereas this, I think, it does kind of evoke that kind of completely losing yourself, to your neuroses and your addictions and paranoia and everything like that. I think it's a much stronger evocation of that kind of theme.
Yeah. Whereas I think, although I kind of like and appreciate it, I think it also has kind of the same issue for me that Fear and Loathing did, which is that kind of you start off on this one kind of thing of going, oh, it's going weird, it's going mad, stuff like that, but then you have to kind of do something with it or the joke gets old. And I'm not saying it's like it doesn't do it as much as Fear and Loathing, but I think by the end of it, I am kind of getting not battle weary or muted to it, but I am kind of starting to care less about it, and then it starts going off on one, and I'm like, I don't really kind of, it's like if it was about 20 minutes shorter, or maybe even 15, maybe it would work for me more powerful than it. I'm not saying that I didn't like it, I did enjoy it, but at the same time, I'm kind of getting tired of it by the end.
I can understand people who find it frustrating as a work, as kind of as something to watch, because it's not,
Definitely.
It doesn't go easy on you, and basically unless you can kind of zero in on that particular kind of frame of mind, you kind of what it's trying to do and what it's trying to kind of deliver to you, you're not going to have a good time. Really, it's like you either get it or you don't.
Yeah, and because it's obviously based an awful lot on Burroughs' life in there and stuff in there that's just deeply personal, I think it's one of those ones where if you have a very specific connection to certain things the character's going through, you're going to get a lot more out of it than somebody that does not have those connections. I was reading Venice again. We were talking about Philip K. Dick, which is a very deeply personal, semi-autobiographical look at his own kind of drug abuse and suicide attempts and things like that very late in his life. And I read it, and though I appreciate it, I know that somebody that's had similar issues to Philip K. Dick in their life is going to get much more out of it than I do. I'm not saying it's a bad novel or anything like that, but it's just that the personal experiences me and I can't connect to that. And I think Naked Lunch is possibly the same way.
Yeah. I think it's a good adaptation of like Burroughs' work and ideas. I'm not sure if it's a good adaptation of the book, and as evidence of that, I will use Burroughs scholar Timothy S. Murphy. He talks about how Burroughs' social and politically situated literary techniques, which in Naked Lunch is the politics of the interzone, where this was happening in the Tangiers. There were these political uprisings against the party in charge, and those take place in the book too. Like there's actual reason and thought put into neutrally discussing the interzone. He says that in the film, it becomes merely the hallucination of a junkie. So Cronenberg, according to him, turns a fragmented, unromantic, bitterly critical, and satirical novel into a conventional Bildungsroman, which I don't know what that means. Yes, what does that mean?
It's a story of essentially somebody developing over time kind of thing. It's almost like a creation novel kind of thing.
Yeah, and I have no issue with that idea as a concept, but if we're saying specifically adapting Naked Lunch, going off an expert on his work and him as a person, but I will concur that this probably is not a good adaptation of the book, but
Yeah.
it works as, for me, Kieran, you were talking about, okay, but what are you saying? That this is the kind of film where you have to parse that out and you have to think about it. And I'm glad it's not didactic. It's just weirdness that you have to find meaning yourself in it, which that's the Lynchian part of this, which I always love.
I certainly agree that I'm so glad that some films don't just spell it out for you, but there are also times when I think that it's a personal connection way they've done that, and if you don't have that personal connection in some way, it's going to be a hell of a lot harder to connect to whatever they're trying to say through the images and whatever, things like that, than somebody that doesn't have those experiences. And it feels like Cronenberg, I think, does that quite a bit, and Lynch as well. Some of the surrealists are like, this is a kind of personal interpretation kind of thing, where if you're on this, it's not sometimes it's not a question of intelligence and that, it's a question of being on the same wavelength.
Yeah.
And I think if you're on the same wavelength as Cronenberg, you're going to get a lot more out than if you're just generally not as a person. And I think I'm just I can appreciate it, but I'm just not personally on the same wavelength.
Yeah.
And the fact that the Burroughs novel Naked Lunch sounds like it's virtually impossible to adapt the way it is.
Yeah.
Because it's a literary text, which kind of brings us on to the next one, which we really need to speed up on these things.
Yeah.
Sam, go for it.
Hey, we are actually doing good on time.
Yeah, all right. Yeah, so I'm talking about Annihilation, film by Alex Garland, based on Jeff Vandermeer's novel. Just brief kind of plot rundown. I'll go from the way the film is first, and I'll come back to the novel. But yeah, so how the film does. I mean, one thing I was to say about this, it's a really interesting sci-fi movie that was critically underseen at the time, because it was basically dumped on Netflix, most territories around the world. Basically most studios didn't have any. I can't remember which. Was it Paramount? Can't remember.
Yes.
Yeah. They didn't have any faith in basically intelligent audiences. Basically, they kept asking for it to be dumbed down, and be more explicit and everything. And now it's gone. I was like, no. And then he shops around, and basically he lost out on a lengthy cinema release, because ended up going.
I thought, because when I watched this today, and obviously it's Netflix, and I'm just like, I thought it went out in cinemas. I could have sworn I would have put good money to look up the box office returns.
It was a brief time in cinemas. This was before Netflix were kind of really doing that. It was, I think they almost they just reluctantly put it out for like a week or a couple of weeks, I think.
I'm shocked to hear you say that, because I remember my theater experience of it vividly. So
yeah, I mean, I don't know whether that goes more for Europe. I mean, I don't know whether it was out for longer in the States, possibly. But I mean, you can tell where you got when I got a copy of the novel, because it's got the Netflix artwork on it. So
I went and got my order came through yesterday of the trilogy in a nice kind of slipcase of all three. So I speed read Annihilation yesterday, and for that, just very quickly, anyone that's read all three books or whatever, if any comments go, and it's like, actually, in the third one they say this, we don't know. We're not taking that. We're treating that it only exists the first book and the film. That's it.
Yeah, I own the second book, but I've not read it yet. So, and if I like that one as well, I'll get the third. But yes, it's brief plot rundown. It's basically a military science expedition into a quarantined area of wilderness, which is basically mysteriously weird things have started happening around there. It's all shrouded by this strange effects they call the shimmer. It's basically like this pearlescent kind of glow around the whole thing. And a few teams have been in, and none of them have come out, or at least one person has come out, but they've not come out in a good way. And all wildlife and biological life in general in there just seems to be going a bit weird, essentially. And this team led by Lena, played by Natalie Portman, she's an academic, former soldier. She volunteers for this mission following the sudden reappearance of her missing husband, who was on the previous mission, and basically they her and a team a team of women, all with like specialties in their fields, basically go into this area and just try and find out exactly what's going on. And
It's a
the
military
way
version of Stalker.
yeah. Yeah, and the way things are, and they're basically try either starts to change them in several different ways. You know, they either start to physically transform, or they lose their grip on reality, or it's purposely left ambiguous exactly kind of how much they're actually seeing is happening, and what's going on in general. I mean, I will say that makes it sound quite kind of vague and kind of all over the place, but that's nothing compared to the book. I mean, the book is very much like I kind of describe it as like a tone poem. It's like there almost isn't really a direct plot. It's just basically it's just like a list of kind of thoughts and feelings and kind of
Yeah.
general vibes, you know, about what the characters are going through. None of the characters in the book are names; they're all just named by their role. You know, the biologist, the psychologist, the surveyor. They actually give all the women in this that they're well, they give them all names, which I think they probably had to do for film. They also try and give them all a bit of a backstory as well, kind of flesh them out a bit more. So, you know, so you know, kind of this kind of stuff Natalie Portman's character Lena's been through, and especially Jennifer Jason Lee's character as well. You kind of they've all got a very particular reason for being there, and their relative kind of vulnerabilities, I suppose, are kind of exposed, and kind of basically they're the seeds of their own destruction, you know, by this weird environment and what's happening around them. Being kind of a fairly decent kind of budget kind of sci-fi. I mean, it wasn't massive, but I think it wasn't. I don't think it was a tiny budget either. You know, decent cast and everything.
40 to 55 million, apparently.
Oh,
yeah.
There's no excuse at that point.
So they had to. I think they had to probably add a bit more spectacle to this, to justify like Netflix bring on board and stuff. So there are creatures in there that I don't think any of them really appear in the book. There's a thing that turns up at the end of the book, but you don't really know what it is. And
there's a dolphin with a human eye at one point, and a boar that charges them at the beginning, and that's about it.
Yeah. But in this, there's a mutant alligator, a mutant bear, people have flowers that have kind of grown into human shape, and kind of fungal things that have grown out of people, and
that is in the book, I think. Or a variation of that.
And they all kind of basically we go from place to place. They kind of they lose their way, they lose track of time and where they are and everything like that. And they could have been there for days or months. I think they say at one point, judging by the rations they've consumed, they think it's more likely to have been months and days, but they just can't work out how time's passed. And they keep encountering like these different kind of remains of kind of the human settlement that this area used to be. So
it's the state park, isn't it? In the film.
So there's like residences, there's an old military base, but everything's gone a bit weird within that. And a little detail, like again, this it's sort of hints at the book, but not. It's more explicit in the film. The idea of this kind of circular kind of time, like a cycle, how everything's how everything's destined to repeat itself. And one character has like a Ouroboros tattoo kind of on their arm, and by the end of the film, Natalie Portman has the same tattoo on her arm. So it's almost like destined to loop around forever. And nice little detail I like is the house they arrive at. This abandoned house within the area, and where they get attacked by the bear is apparently it's the same layout as the house of Natalie Portman's character at the beginning of the film. It's like the same set but kind of redressed, but and they purposely show you just enough of it so you can make that kind of connection and stuff like that. There's some really nice kind of striking kind of visuals, like when she reconnects with her husband, who's just walked back in after being missing for years, without, out of the blue. They kind of reaching across to each other, and this you see their hands like touching through a glass of water, and like the water kind of refracts their kind of image and kind of almost blends them together. And there's this recurring theme in the film about how this area kind of refracts everything. It refracts like DNA and matter and energy, and so that's why everything's going so weird. It's just it just changes your perception of everything, and physically changes everything, in this kind of area. It's I say you kind of compare it to like something like Arrival, I suppose, and that it's a very kind of conceptual kind of sci-fi. It's got these really striking visuals and kind of memorable kind of imagery and some cool sci-fi stuff in it. But it is about the ideas, and it is about not giving you those answers, but just leaving you to think on it and come up with your own conclusions by the end.
Yeah. I think it is kind of Arrival's a good touchstone. I think of it almost the film as almost like a cross between like Stalker with kind of the visuals Hollywood of Arrival, something like that. And I mean, the original story for Arrival is ridiculously like mad. Like if you know the ending of Arrival and what kind of the thing is and what it does with time, the book kind of throws it all off 100%. Novella, I think it is. What I was going to say on it, because guess what? I've done both, and I've done it in the last 24 hours. So it's fairly fresh in my head. And I mean, I read it for my PhD anyway, and you can see the amount of sticky notes I've still got to take down. The film version is very much the Hollywood take. And when you adapt something for, they said, you've got at least 40 million in there. There's big people behind it, even if it's not like the 200 mil or whatever. You have to make certain changes, and there's there are certain things like having the ending is completely different of the final. It's essentially they give an answer at the end of the film. I'm not gonna say what it is, but in the book there isn't. There's nothing.
No, I mean, basically, the film, Natalie Portman does get out. Well, something that looks like Natalie Portman gets out. I mean, but yeah, it's kind of left to draw some conclusions about some things, but equally, as you say, it does answer some things quite definitively. Whereas obviously, I haven't read book 2, but basically, the first book ends with her off on the next leg of a journey. Basically, she doesn't come out. She's just going to explore further down the coast.
The book ends with the same ending as Mary Shelley's novel The Last Man, which is set in a plague, and it ends on New Year's Day 2100, which I fucking love. Where the main character essentially writes in this thing, I'm the last person alive, I'm going to put this down, I'm going to get in a boat, sail to the Mediterranean, whatever takes me. And that's similar ending to the book. The thing with the book, and the reason why I actually don't think you can compare the film and the book very closely is, as I was reading through, the entire concept of what film they call it the Shimmer, in the book is Area X. It's a different kind of what they use this area for to suggest and put forward ideas wise of what it is. In the film, it's kind of the refracting of DNA and very much a look at what makes us up, and that's somebody examining us, and that is what is scary about it, and it's something that is examining the world. In the book, I mean, as it is, it's the entire thing is told by, it's a diary entry at the end. She says, I've been writing this for about 4 days now, putting it all down. So it is literary in its thing, and the entire book is literary because my interpretation that is kind of breakdown of meaning itself, of semiotics almost, in a postmodernist way of taking away any reference to anything else. So by taking away the names, the only things that get named are things in Area X. So there's this big kind of entity that she nicknames the Crawler, that is writing made up of these little parasites inhabit the writing that are a bit like a sermon, I think it's described as. There's a load of stuff in there that's kind of tricky, but I mean, I can't remember all of it, even though I've got a load of notes. But it's almost a breakdown in semiotics of meaning, of conscious, of very literary ideas, which are almost impossible to translate visually.
Yeah.
So
Although
you have to do something different.
Yeah.
I will
although it's
argue
interesting
you
that-
could very easily change the you could do that if you were considerate
Yeah.
enough to, because like semiotics is visual too. I just think
Yeah.
that is not
I would
anything
say-
I got out of the film, so that's
Yeah.
interesting.
Yeah,
You
that's
say it's
why
in the
I'm saying
book.
it's a completely different
Yeah.
take on
But
what.
I would say both versions kind of have an element of that. Because if the book is about breaking down kind of as you say meaning and kind of what our understanding of everything, and kind of doing that through literary devices, and the film kind of does that on a more literal kind of visual
Yeah.
level, in terms of playing with what we're seeing and what it means and what it means to the characters. There's an element to that. I mean, I find it interesting that Alex Garland's quite famously said he read the book, obviously he remembered reading the book, but he didn't reread it before writing the screenplay. And a screenplay is based on his vague memories of his first reading of the book.
Oh,
I love that
So
so much.
No, Kieran doesn't.
Well,
why would you do that?
I would much rather see like an impressionistic adaptation
Yeah.
than just like
he described it as like a dream of the book.
Yeah,
that is amazing.
The book, there's a lot of focus I was saying about kind of the semiotics. There's things on photographs. There's bits on. There's even random bits that change. So essentially, the psychologist uses hypnosis a lot of the time to give verbal commands to control. When the main character inhales stuff from this area X and is then immune to the hypnosis, so she is immune to verbal commands. There is a break in that connection from that. That does not come through in the thing in the story. It says that they didn't take any technology in there because something happened the once and they now don't do it. So you don't have visual stuff. There's photographs and stuff that don't come in. They find a load of journals, articles that have been hoarded. There's an awful lot of stuff on meaning and things like that. Not just literary devices, but the idea of putting things down that are solid and tangible, which gets detached from what solid and tangible ideas is. And one of the reasons why the main character, who isn't named in the book, kind of goes the way that she is she's very detached from human society even before she goes in. So she kind of has a way of lasting an awful lot longer because she's kind of removed from a society which ascribes meaning and ideas to things. She's very much
Kieran,
an observer.
What you're describing is the film itself, then. The film is this detached entity from the written down text of the book. And maybe the entire thing is a meta statement from Alex Garland on adaptation.
No, I don't think it is. I think there had to be changes made because certain things don't translate, and if certain things did translate, they don't translate to Paramount on a $40 to $50 million budget. Things have to change. For like even Natalie Portman's character, she's so much more likable in the film.
Yeah.
In the book, she's kind of not, just because that is the way a person is. If you put that as a main character on screen for your $40 million thing with big studio heads behind you, they're going to go, get out of town.
You get
we want
Superman
the audience
from
going
Zack
to
Snyder.
vaguely like. So even stuff like that, just changes to the characters that have to be adapted to $40 to $50 million budget picture for reasons of producers, if nothing else.
The lingering question from me, a person who has only seen the film, is does the weird glass mirror sound creature is that expressed in the book?
There is a version of it.
There's something else. Yeah. It's not the same. It's an externalized kind of tormenting entity, but it's quite different, I'd say.
Yeah.
And even the way she encounters it, 'cause she only she's aware of it being around, doesn't see it for a long time in the book, and then she sees it and isn't able to move past it, but then later is able to move past freely, and it kind of obviously reveals itself, but it doesn't lead her on a merry dance like it does in the film.
That and the bear are like the two images that really stand out to me, and the lady turning into plants like Tessa Thompson or whoever.
And I also think the when they go to like the swimming pool thing, and you've got the flowers blooming there. There's almost like a skull splitting part, which I was reminded of. Is it Saturn devouring his children? Painted by
it's very
Goya,
much like that.
which I think
Yeah.
is going to be a visual version of the kind of sermonal writing that you get in this, which is very much like this. One of the final things on the breakdown of semiotics and kind of linguists in the book is the fact there's 5 people meant to go in, but only 4 actually make it like beyond the barrier, and the one that goes is the linguist. So they have no, like, the linguistics is dead as soon as you go in.
I'd forgotten that, but that's very clever, because it's been a while since I've read it.
So the idea of like being able to interpret language, like their language expert is shot, or no, you're dead, gone. We don't know what happens to them as soon as they go in.
Is there a book author in the movie who doesn't make it in the same way? Because that would have been funny.
No, but it is also interesting that the film kind of spends like 30 minutes before you go in. The book takes it right from the start and actually hides a lot of details, and then it says on the way through, because the biology says, I've kept details from you so that you would see me as a rational person before I give them out, so I can give it as objective as possible and essentially get you on my side. So you've got this weighing of evidence in a written text and stuff. Again, it's just all this stuff that is it's not like impossible to adapt to a filmic medium, but you have to do it very differently. I would say.
A lot of people compared it as well as to obviously the book it's adapting, but to work of J.G. Ballard and to H.P. Lovecraft. There are some artists there, like the character names they give the women in this, rather than their titles, Ventress, Thornston, Radek, and Shepherd. They're all from the Crystal World, apparently. The J.J. Ballard novel, and because it's more explicit about the alien invasion type thing, they also compare it to Color Out of Space, H.P. Lovecraft.
I was thinking Color Out of Space actually as well.
And I can definitely see that that's the point comparison, especially in terms of how a lot of it's about what color does to you, basically, isn't it? It's like
I would also compare it very, very quickly before we move on to Rendezvous with Rama, the Arthur C. Clarke novel, where there is a kind of a voyage into somewhere where there are no answers given, and that may be Villeneuve's next project after he's done with Dune and Dune Messiah, which I'm really hoping it is, because I want a Rendezvous with Rama adaptation.
Well, he said he's going to do something else before Dune Messiah, so that may be his next project.
So in terms of final things, I like the film, but I think because of the changes that necessarily have to be made, you have to view it differently to the book. And I think it would have been seen differently if it was a film not based on a book. If the book didn't exist, it would be a different experience.
Yeah, I really like both. I think he did. Asgard, kind of took a few key things, kind of ran with them, did his own thing with them, basically. But I think two different mediums, different challenges, and they both, I think, use their mediums really well to achieve what they're trying to do. So I'd recommend both for different reasons.
And I didn't read the book, but I love the movie Annihilation. So I mean, if it's on Netflix in the UK, watch it. Like, I don't think it's on Netflix here.
Yeah,
that might have been a foreign or international, distribution thing.
A non-US distribution.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And now to quickly get to one that probably isn't distributed anywhere yet, because it was released last September.
I think it's on Hulu here in the US. I'm not 100% on that, but I think
whatever
it is.
That is. Poirot, because we were talking adaptations that weren't kind of straight adaptations, and obviously everyone's first one is The Shining, and then we go, that's too obvious. And initially, at one point, I did think of
to be fair, Agatha Christie is obvious for you, but carry on.
I thought of The Thing from Who Goes There, because obviously that got changed into The Thing from Another World, which is very different from the book, and then Joe Carpenter try and gets it realigned. But I very quickly, for time reasons, because I talk too much, I'm discussing A Haunting in Venice, which has either of you seen yet?
No. Because I hated Death on the Nile that much, I wasn't going to watch a third.
Interesting. Why did you hate Death on the Nile? Genuine question.
It was It was padded to buggery. It was overindulgence, and it was unintentionally hilarious all too often. I just tonally, I don't think he got it right that time. I just. I didn't get on with it.
Meanwhile, I just realized that this isn't Death on the Nile, which is the one that I saw. I saw Murder on the Orient Express too.
Oh,
But...
to show him something else, they gave his mustache an origin story.
Oh,
No.
Yeah.
Is that in the book, Kieran?
No, it's not.
He definitely was in the Belgian War. Belgian in the war. I don't think that is the origin. Or if it is, it's in one of the other novels. It's not in.
Is there a record scratch with "You're probably wondering how I got here"? And for those listening, that was me moving my mustache.
So. And to be honest, shoving it at the start, a flashback at the start, is not an Agatha Christie thing. It'd be something that would be peppered in somewhere else. So yeah, the thing with this is that, as he's probably muted us, Murder on the Orient Express, aside from one or two moments, was very faithful in the long run. Death on the Nile, aside from one or two moments that he's added in, was generally quite faithful in terms of the general plot and the moments and the beats and who the killer was and stuff like that. Halloween Party is not.
No.
Like, absolutely not. And I think I heard an interview with him saying, we did the first two very, very faithful. We want to do one that kind of was completely different. We want to do like a tonal shift. And actually, a lot of the reviews at the time were saying that Death on the Nile and Orient Express were like, yeah, they look nice, they're big and spectacular, but they're just like straight adaptation. There's nothing new to them. So they went, right, let's go to one of the last Poirot novels, which is Halloween Party. Let's take a couple of bits of iconography and completely gut the rest. There's nothing else remaining. Halloween Party is not set in Venice. There's no seance. Like the killers, if there's plural or whatever, how that works, are different or the same partially, kind of thing. So the team, as it were, is different at the end. The method of killing is different. There's a few bits that are kept the same. So somebody kills because they might know who killed somebody else. That's the same in general. So it's a silencing killing. There's a bucket of apples and some apple bobbing that is the same. Some of the character names are the same, and one or two slightly are. And then that's about it. Like literally the entire plot, and then there's a garden, which is there, but is used for different purposes in the book and the film. So it's just complete, utter change. It'd be like taking something like Macbeth and going, okay, we've got a character called Macbeth, one called Lady Macbeth. It's set now in Brazil. It's like, if Kurosawa had gone, right, we're going to make Throne of Blood, but the only similarities are the main character wants the throne, and maybe there's something about a prophecy. Everything else is completely different plotline. It's almost not a Christie novel anymore. You might, because I was watching it going, there is nothing the same with this, and I'd seen the trailers and then read the book a couple of weeks beforehand, and I'm going, there's no seance. It's not set in Venice. There's no what the hell is going on? This is not a horror novel at all. It's straightforward detective, not one of Poirot's best.
No.
So it's
does the film work on its own terms as like a mystery film?
Well, I quickly reread my own review that I did for the Film magazine. Hello. Going through it, and
only the best sources here.
Oh yeah. We're never going to plug our own stuff, We're never going to fall down to that. Because they want to do something different, they changed it to essentially being a horror movie with a detective in there, and a ghost movie. Because obviously ghosts are now the trend. Thank you, Lee Wan and James Wan, Blumhouse. So it's kind of, in a way, there's some Blumhousey kind of moments in it, and I'm just saying that because they're the ones that pump out the Hollywood ghost movies now. And I'm not saying good or bad because some are worse than others, but it feels Blumhousey. And so just it's a weird tone because it is kind of experimental, and Branagh obviously hasn't done this kind of thing before. And it came out so quickly after Death in the Nile. It was like 18 months.
I think that's because Stefan now had been delayed for so long, wasn't it? It's like the gap between have been shortened so much.
Yeah.
Between the pandemic and the whole Army Hammer thing, it was.
Yeah, and then
I think they
from
call that
that
an Irish twin screening, by the way.
what he said.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there's moments in it that kind of there's some bits that are fine, but at the same time, Poirot seemed quite bored a lot of the time. Branagh is not as convincing, even you said you didn't like Death on the Nile. I mean, when I think of Poirot, I will think of David Suchet, as I think pretty much everybody in existence will. Branagh has made a different version of Poirot, and in Orient Express, it takes a while to get used to, but in the end, there are elements of there. It's a different interpretation of the character.
Yeah.
Death on the Nile.
Works for me.
Yeah, Death on the Nile, he still feels like the same character that was there. This one, he just feels like, in the nicest way, Branagh's phoning it in. There's stuff that's not right. The trouble is, then, it's all in one night in a dark, dingy kind of palazzo. So it's all meant to be looking by candlelight. So it's all really kind of samey visually as well, which is quite depressing. The revelation right at the end comes very quick and fast. It's like all this stuff, and then it's like, right, we're into the explanation. It's like, what? Okay, we solved it already. There's weird stuff with his Catholic faith, which is attempted to go into in this. Which, yes, he's a Catholic. Well, no, it doesn't even say he's a Catholic. He said he had faith at one point, but he's seen no evidence of God, which is interesting.
I mean, obviously, it's probably come up in the Christian novels, but has that come up at all in either of the previous two films? His faith, I don't remember.
I don't think so. No. So it is very, very lightly brushed on. But the fact that he's now being confronted with the possibility of an afterlife, like Michelle Yeoh's character kind of questions him on it in a couple of lines of dialogue early on. And the rest of the time he's going, there's no such thing as ghosts, there's no such thing as ghosts, like all the way through, and I must find out what is going on. But like he was raised Catholic, and actually in I can't remember the name of the final Christie novel, Poirot novel, but at the very least in the final episode of the David Suchet version, he's on his deathbed clutching a rosary, praying for something. And it's like, this is an interesting thing that somebody so kind of methodical. Still, there's an inkling of faith in there in the character in the books, and obviously Branagh will have known them because he's the kind of person that will have read them all to get everything. And the fact that that doesn't come through as much as it does is interesting, especially considering you're in Venice, which apparently they did because they wanted it to be somewhere exotic, despite the fact you hardly see Venice because they're shut up inside a palazzo at night most of the time. So you get a couple of things of them coming through in the first 5 minutes, like one shot of the roofs at the end, and that's it.
And I suppose with the new title as well, they can almost like establish a formula. It's like, this is what people expect now. They expect a location and a thing that happens in that location.
It's just, it's not awful. I've now seen it twice, but it's also not wonderful. Even as a film on its own. I mean, the book isn't the greatest Poirot novel, and the ending's kind of weird. But even with the changes, because you almost can't have the two, this one almost doesn't feel like a Christie novel. It's gutted so much that kind of the essence of what might have been, and to be honest, like it's a Poirot story. If you've marketed it as Poirot, you've got to have the feeling of Agatha Christie in there. That's like doing a Sherlock Holmes thing without feeling Conan Doyle in there somewhere. It just doesn't work. You need that. It's integral to the character and the plot of the storyline. And it almost feels like there's so much changed. This could have been any detective in the world, and there would be no difference.
Well,
because
Kieran,
it doesn't feel like Christie anymore.
It's interesting you point that out, because I'm looking at Poirot's series, and this is the 41st book in it. So like the feeling, the style, all that stuff should be very firmly established. And one other note is While the Light Lasts in Other Stories is the last Christie Poirot in 1997. It's insane how this character... Yeah, this character spans the Christie verse from 1920 to 1997. That is insane.
Yeah, it's quite funny. In the first one, it mentions that he was like 50 because like she didn't know how long he was going to last, and by the time she got to like the 17th, 18th novel. It's just like, yeah, I kind of regret writing that now. So yeah, welcome to Agatha Christie. It was just like a character that she couldn't get away from. And the trouble was, eventually she got into a form where she knew how to write. And an Agatha Christie novel, it doesn't matter if it's Marple or Poirot or any of the others, it still feels like an Agatha Christie novel. Some do little bits of variations, even the short stories. They feel very. She got her style, her formula down, and a lot of people have slated it for saying it's just popular stuff. It's not very literary, but it's very good, very effective, and very readable. And it, you read something and it feels like an Agatha Christie novel. Knives Out is just Agatha Christie, a new interpretation.
Well, and
you can feel there's more of Agatha Christie in Knives Out than in this. Put it that way.
Kieran, what you're describing probably, we talked about Annihilation and Naked Lunch. Those are not the typical adaptation. The typical one is Harry Potter, or it's just it's a pop novel that made lots of money that we're going to turn into a movie and tell the same story.
Whereas this one was a deliberate attempt to get away from the almost straight kind of book-to-screen adaptations of the first two. And my thing is, there is so much gutted from it. To be honest, you could watch this, read A Haunting in Venice read Halloween Party, with like 2 years apart, and have no idea they're the same story. Genuinely. There's like, one or two bits of iconography, the bobbing for apples, there's a garden in there, there's somebody that has, a feeling that they know who's murdered somebody else earlier on. And I think Ariadne Oliver is also in the book as well, but she's in about 12 books. So, like, there's almost nothing remaining of the original book. It might as well have been they might as well have written a new story and just added a few bits in from Halloween Party. That's probably what they did, and gone, we can line this up and say it was an adaptation of this one to get more sales for Halloween Party again, as everyone reads before the film comes out. So it's almost not an adaptation. It's almost like Branagh does something, a new Christie Poirot story, and it just even on its own doesn't quite work. I appreciate the attempt to do something new and move away from what they've done before, but it doesn't work for Haunting in Venice as much. It's not the worst movie in the world. You can still have a little bit of fun with it, but it's, again, there's so much better stuff to be watching.
I'm looking at a Screen Rant article from Bill Dubiel from it, or about it. 10 biggest differences to Agatha Christie's Halloween Party. And you've mentioned a lot of them, but the one that stands out is changing his personality, which you touched on, but he says it doesn't disclose much new information, but the atheistic outlook that he has drives him to attempt to expose Joyce Reynolds, whom he assumes to be a fraud as opposed to an actual medium. And like, I don't care about the specifics of things being changed, but how and why and is it effective is like such a fundamental part of, does that work? Changing it from England to Venice, who cares? But changing his personality is odd.
This is also an interesting one that I think now a lot of protagonists for series, if you go on for a couple of films, you have to explore that they're damaged psychologically in some way. There's something wrong with them, that they're conflicted in inner torment. Whereas Poirot was normally fairly standard. I mean, she wrote like 50 novels and like 200 short stories for him, or something, ridiculous. But all the way through, and especially in the Suchet adaptation, I know we shouldn't compare different adaptations, but I am doing. He may have been kind of, a little bit confused a lot of the time because he's Belgian. This is his second language, and he's constantly getting used to. He's going to, how is it that you say something like this that it comes through once or twice in the Branagh versions? But those other versions.
No, I was just saying, isn't that an affectation, to throw people off a bit?
But in the books, in the short stories, and in kind of the other adaptations, 99% of the time, Poirot is fundamentally a kind person. Fundamentally, he's a good-hearted. He likes a laugh. He might have his little foibles or whatever, and he has these moments where he's very disapproving of criminals and things like that. But he's fundamentally a very nice, kind person. Branagh, very often, his version can come off quite abrupt, quite abrasive.
he's a bit of a dick, isn't he?
At times, yeah. And this is a fundamental change to the character as well. There's almost like there's a damage in somewhere, a psychological thing that we can explore and things like that because we need to do something else. It's like,
Kieran, you're saying all of that sarcastically when like that is sort of a fundamental aspect of storytelling is exploring the flaws of a character.
The difference between exploring a character and making somebody specifically your main character abrasive, specifically for the reason of now we can have another plot one. That it is fundamentally different, and the reason I don't like it is because it makes him like less likable, and Poirot is not about exploring Poirot. Like he's an archetype. You get a couple of characters, there you go, run with him, and it's not about Poirot.
He's the reason for the plot to happen.
Whereas Branagh's version, this one almost like makes it
it's
like
it's about Poirot. Yeah,
it's about Poirot. Yeah, which is never the point of a Poirot story.
Could it be argued that is perhaps a weakness of Christie's stories, that it's not about exploring the main character in any way?
No.
Why not?
Like, Agatha Christie was there to write a puzzle and have fun.
Tell me another book or movie where it's a good thing that we do not learn and explore the main character, or character at the center of the story, at least.
The Basil Rathbone Holmes adaptations.
Sure. I can't even tell you if those are real or not. So
yeah, they are. There was like 15 of them from 39 to 45 with Nigel Bruce as well. And it was literally just Holmes just like comes in, and in like 5 minutes, this is the exploration that you get of him. Here's Sherlock Holmes, you know. There's not that much more explored to him. And
I think some characters can be surface level, and obviously if they've become that iconic, kind of them, and they're just there to facilitate the action, and they're kind of. I think going back and adding stuff later on, like some depth, sometimes can work, but I don't think it's always a necessity. I think in this case, the Branagh Poirot probably wasn't.
And you can explore a character without making him an asshole to have an excuse to explore the character, which is what it feels like this one's doing. Like especially in this one, he's very abrasive, very abrupt for reasons that are kind of pointless, just to kind of poke fun at him, and like it's almost like Branagh went, I want this one to be about me, which just feels slightly off.
Kenneth Branagh starring it in the film he writes and directs, saying it's about him.
It's like you know.
No.
Poirot was a vehicle that you kind of, he was like a companion that you went along with, and he would show you these things. A bit like, I'm going to make a very bad comparison now, Virgil in Dante's Inferno for the first two. Poirot is almost like a guide in a way.
I mean, is this not just a case of originalism? The book was this way, so it is not good that Poirot is this way. Is it the abrasiveness, the way they went about it, or is it that they're doing it at all that is more the issue?
No, to be honest, if this is a completely new character, because let's be honest, it's a completely new story. So like you can't really compare it to the book. I think it's just like doing it for this character. He's not likable just as a character in this movie.
So it's more that he is abrasive than it is that they make him the center of it and explore him.
Well, they're both links, though, aren't they? I'd say it's because he's kind of. Branagh wants an interesting, prickly kind of lead character to sink his teeth into. Basically, probably thought the book Poirot wasn't enough to him. For him
personally, I just don't think it works for this film. Like, see what they're trying to do, it just doesn't get pulled off.
But I mean more specifically, is it the fact that he is if he had a different trait that they were using to sort of explore and build off of, would that be preferable?
It might feel more in keeping with Christie's character.
And it might feel more in keeping with the Poirot that he's done in the first two films as well.
Which I would be more concerned with than the book, but...
Consistency,
It feels less like... it almost feels like he's had some kind of seismic shift in the past to completely change the character, which is not explored if it happens. So it's just kind of, it's just like a head turn, like what the hell happened to you? And he's just very much a less likable, interesting, caring character from the first two films, from books, from every other adaptation.
I guess I would ask.
I'm not saying they can't do that, but I'm saying pull it off well and make it interesting. It's just
Kira, what
not
makes
done for
him
any interesting reason other than I want to make him.
What makes him interesting when he's a flat, like, just conduit for the story?
Well, it's not the fact that he's like interesting. It's the fact that he's there as a guide, and he's like his purpose is to escort you around the cases and show you the interesting things of how it works in a fun, enjoyable way. And there are moments where they do a little bit into it, but generally that is Poirot. And I think at this point, when Poirot has been going for over 100 years, fundamentally altering him in this way is difficult. And just personally, I don't like the way that Branagh plays and has written Poirot in this version.
Yeah, fair enough. So we do need to wrap up there.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah,
this has
Kira,
gone on longer than it should have done.
What are y'all's final thoughts of people who have actually seen it? Because I did not see this movie.
No. I've seen the other two, but from what Kieran's saying, if he changes his personality that much, then it doesn't sound like
it's not like it's not like complete 180, but it's enough that he is portrayed slightly differently. He's damaged goods in this one that needs to be explored, and this is a thing that all Hollywood series do. That we need to go deep into the damagedness of the character psyche. It's like, sod off. Like, I didn't come here for that. I came here for a murder mystery. Like, what? Go away. I want to interrogate the psyches of the villains and the people involved with it, not necessarily the detective. That's why not why you read a detective novel.
Yeah.
Cool. All right. Well, that is our exploration of adaptations. I'm sure we'll get back into this. Maybe
I was going to say, at some point we should do Adaptation. The film, which is adapted to the book, and isn't it in the film that he's trying to adapt the story into a film? Which is the film.
We'll come back to it. No more tangents. We'll come back to it.
Yeah. Whenever I typed adaptation into my school library, it was a lot of things about evolution. But yeah. So we'll be back on adaptation. But until then, guys, where could people find you?
You can find me at sspthinksfilm.com, where you can see my full review of Annihilation, which I wrote years ago, if you're interested, and over at the Film Magazine, as always.
Hopefully you don't find me anywhere. If you do, I'm K-Judgmental in various places. I think the last thing I did for TFM, I got a review of Blumhouse's Imaginary. It came out 2 weeks ago, something like that. And we'll have various bits upcoming.
Yeah, and you can find me at Jacob Film Guy. I have some director ranked cooking up, so look out for those.
Including Cronenberg?
No, not including Cronenberg. I think someone already did Cronenberg, but maybe not. But yeah, that is it for this episode. We'll be back with something else later. You can go read the Film Magazine and give us money through PayPal, or buy some cool fancy water bottles or phone cases or T-shirts. You can get all of that at our Redbubble linked below. So that is it. Thank you for listening and watching, and goodbye.
Adios.
Goodbye.